Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Dollar Dialogue. And I believe this is the 42nd episode. And this is our episode today is on how the Congo shapes the game of US, Russia, and Ukraine peace talks. And unfortunately, again, we don't have our main host, Ari Malik, available today. So I'm going to be taking over again. And but I'm very excited for the episode because you guys may remember Rishan Ali from another episode we did a while ago. I remember he joined. He was like one of the first guest speakers we ever had on the podcast, and but I can introduce him again. So Rishan Ali, he goes to a school in the UK called the Charterhouse. It's a very prestigious school, and he is also really interested in politics, especially politics and history. And he even plans to take higher level history in his following year as he does the IB. And yeah, he's a guy who personally I know he's really into politics. So I don't doubt the fact that he can um, provide us with some insightful perspectives. And I'm really looking forward to this episode. So Rishan, would you like to add anything to the introduction I just gave about you?
No, I think you introduced me very well. I'm very excited to be back on here. And yeah, I'm very excited to talk about the DRC today.
Yeah, and just before we start and dive into the history, Rishan, you personally requested this topic. So I just have a question, like why did you choose this topic? Like why did you request this topic, Rishan?
I think it's because it's very interesting to see how small nations are starting to play such a large role in bigger conflicts. Like the Congolese Civil War has been going on for so long. Like the first Congo War started in 1996. Then, 1 year after it ended in 1997, the second Congo War started in 1998. So, basically, since 1996 to essentially the present time, Congo has been in a constant conflict proxy war, but no one really talks about it that much. But now it's starting to play a larger role in Western politics in terms of the peace talks happening in Ukraine over concerns about their minerals, which, I mean, Trump is really pushing for a minerals deal, but Congo might change all that. So I think the changing landscape is really what wanted me to talk to you guys about this today.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Thank you, Rishan, for that. So, just diving into the history. So, I think that we'd have to go back to the late 1800s because the Congo wasn't just colonized; it was personally owned by King Leopold II of Belgium, and this wasn't a colony in the traditional sense. It was a corporate horror show masked as a humanitarian mission. Millions of Congolese were enslaved to extract rubber and ivory, and the profits were straight sent to Belgium. And the cost was an estimated 10 million lives. And this era set the tone. Congo has always been rich in resources but poor in power. And in 1960, Congo gained independence, but it wasn't peace, it was chaos. Within weeks, a civil war erupted, and the CIA got involved. The USSR backed the other side, and in the middle, Patrice Lumumba, Congo's first prime minister, who was assassinated with the CIA's fingerprints all over it. And this Cold War interference locked the DRC into a cycle of proxy conflicts that still echoes today.
Yeah, I mean, the colonial rule under the Belgians was really what I feel like it set the Congo up for disaster because the exploitation of the DRC's natural resources, which we're seeing to this day, and which is why it plays such a large role for the U.S. and it's going to play a larger role in the future. I think is just because of their natural resources and superpowers just pulling at them. So, do you want to talk about? Should I talk about how the first Congolese war started?
Yeah,
Please
sure, go
do.
ahead. Yeah.
Okay, so after the Rwandan genocide, where Hutus were massacring the Tutsis, uh, and the Tutsis started fighting back, the Hutu militias fled into the Congo. So then the Rwandan government and the Tutsis, they weren't going to allow the Hutus to get away with it and establish safe haven in the Congo. So what they did was um, they supported rebel insurgencies in the Congo, and they themselves uh, invaded the Congo in the first Congolese War, and in the end, the Rwandan-backed uh, militias won, and Kabila, I think that was his name, yeah, Laurent Desire Kabila took power of the Congo. But then, shortly after, Kabila couldn't control the country, so then he was forced to go against his Rwandan and Ugandan as well allies, which caused a larger war, which happened in the Second Congolese War. So you had the DRC government, which is Kabila, who was supported by Angola, Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Sudan and Chad. And then you had the rebel groups, which, like the First Congolese War, were backed by Rwanda and Uganda. And also you had local militias. And all in all, what ended up happening was all the surrounding and neighboring countries wanted to gain their power over the DRC because, as mentioned before, the DRC was extremely rich in natural resources. And also inside the country, different groups started kept on popping up and wanting to gain their own power. And technically, that war ended in 2003 when Kabila's son took power, but it is still a horrible conflict. You have you still have multiple military groups acting in it. You have M23, which is Rwandan backed. You have the ADF, and you also have Rwanda and Uganda still heavily influencing them. So, yeah, I mean that's basically the history of the DRC up until now. So right now, what's going on is it's basically in a bit of a ceasefire state, but M23, the Rwandan militias, recently did take over some land, but it's just been back and forth, and it's a horrible stalemate.
Yeah, thank you, Rishan, for your insightful thoughts. So, I just had a question out of curiosity since we were talking about the First Congolese War. So, Rishan, like, why did regional powers like Rwanda and Uganda feel justified in invading Zaire, or Zaire, however you pronounce it?
Um, so the Hutu militias, what they did in Rwanda, I mean, is calling it horrible is an understatement. It was a complete and utter genocide against the Tutsis. So, I mean, the justification for the Rwandas was completely there. Uh, Millions, I think 2 million. I'm just pulling this out of my memory, so don't quote me on this, but I think something around 2 million Hutus fled into Zaire and the Congo, what is now the Congo, in an attempt to escape Tutsi punishments because of their actions. So that's why the Rwandans felt and the Ugandans felt justified in their invasion. They wanted to get rid of all these Hutu extremists in the that were hiding in the Congo.
Okay, okay, I got it. Thanks for answering the question. So, Rishan, where do you? We talked about the history in the First Congolese War. So, where do you think we should delve into now? Like, where
I
should the
mean, yeah, we can talk about the um, possible mineral deal that might pop up with the DRC and the US. So,
Before we jump so far into the future, I just had a short question. How did the First Congolese War, often called Africa's First World War, reshape not only the DRC but also the power dynamics of the African subcontinent or continent itself? And what parallels do you think we could draw between its causes and like modern geopolitical conflicts?
so the it was it was like it killed millions of people, it displaced people, and also it created a sort of proxy war among the African nations. So, and also foreign nations. France and some other mercenaries were also involved in it. You had Zimbabwe, you had Rwanda, Uganda, all Burundi, all and Angola as well, I think was in there. So all these nations were pitting their cards against each other, and that caused a wider conflict and wider tension in Africa, especially in the center. And sorry, what was the other part
Okay.
of your question? The impact it has
Yeah,
today.
yeah.
So the impact it has today is because is the first Congolese War created such instability that it never really ended. Like you could say when Kabila's son took over after his assassination, that was the end of the first Congolese War, but you only saw peace for like a year or two, and then it was back into conflict and militias all over again. So the war has, I don't think it's fair to give a proper evaluation on the effect it has had on today, because in my opinion, it never really ended since 1996.
Oh, okay, got it. That was very insightful, Rishan. So, as you requested, we could talk about the possible mineral deals between the U.S. and the DRC. So, talking like we already covered the background, we already covered the history and history of the entire situation, and Rishan had also given us insights about the first Congolese War and also how it still has modern day impacts to this day. So moving on and talking about the possible mineral deals, I think like you may ask why the US is suddenly paying so much attention to the Congo. And I think it's because of the critical minerals. And the Democratic Republic of the Congo produces over 70% of the world's cobalt, and cobalt is essential for lithium ion batteries, which power electric vehicles, smartphones, and military drones. And right now, China dominates this global supply chain. Over 60% of Congolese cobalt exports are processed by Chinese firms, and that makes Washington nervous, especially as it races towards clean energy independence and ramps up defense tech production. So, in December 2022, the US announced a memorandum of understanding with the DRC and Zambia to develop regional value chain for electric batteries. And the idea was to source cobalt and copper from Congo and Zambia, refine and assemble components locally, and build an African EV supply chain that bypasses China. And this deal, if takes shape, could reshape US Africa relations. And it's a shift from extraction to partnership, and at least on paper. And yeah, do you, Suprita Rishan, do you have anything to add on to what I just said?
Yeah, I think the fact that you bring up China, that's a really important thing about all this, because as I'm sure we all know, China has been extremely involved in African relations. They've been heavily investing into Africa, which the US has not really done because they've been afraid of it. But now the US under Trump, they're becoming more hawkish against China. And I mean, some could even say Trump is employing Kissinger's tactics, or reverse Kissinger tactics, in fact, because what Kissinger did was he improved relations with China to draw them away from Russia, and some could say Trump is doing that to Russia. So, having a mineral deal with Congo, one of the largest, as you said, largest cobalt extractors in the world, and especially since they're so, especially since China invested so heavily into the Congo, having a good minerals deal with Congo would be very beneficial for the U.S. and it will sort of diminish China's influence in the Congo and Greater Africa, because Congo is such a big part in African politics. So yeah, I think that's the large reasoning behind a large reason behind why Trump and the U.S. are pushing for a Congolese minerals deal. And I mean, there are way more layers to this. You could talk about the economic leverage over Russia as well, because Russia is also a minerals um, extractor. And so, if the US invested heavily into Congolese infrastructure and Congolese peace, it could possibly tank Russia's economy. There are also, it could also create an alternative for other nations to China, because the reason the Congo is not too heavily invested in, except for China, is because other nations are scared of its instability. So if the US can secure Congolese stability, it can pull investors away from China, which is exactly what the US would want.
Also, while talking about minerals, I was just wondering the valuation of DRC's mineral deposits is $24 trillion, but their GDP is around just a hundred to $200 billion, and their GDP per capita is around just $500. Why are they so poor? Is it because of economic mismanagement, corruption, and what are the causes for this problematic disparity?
I think there are many causes for this disparity. Um, Obviously, corruption is a massive problem in the DRC. The government is very fragmented. The exploitation of the resources has not been done efficiently enough, I believe, and it is done in very inhumane manners. They use child labor, and also a lot of it is done under foreign investors who are not, I mean, not the most, um, safe, because only risky investors would be entering the Congo, which is such an unstable area. There is possibly some, you know, backdoor sales going on in there. And also, the people are suffering a lot in the Congo because the war has been going on for so long, the infrastructure is gone, and rebel and militia groups control different parts of the country. So they're leveraging different parts of the country over each other to try and get better deals, and all in all, it's just a whole lot of corruption and fighting that just causing the Congolese people to suffer, while no one is benefiting from this whole situation. And I think large, like you said, the Congo has massive reserves, which are confirmed, which sort of brings me on to my point about the Ukrainian, the influence this will have on the Ukrainian-Russian peace talks, uh, is because Washington really wants a beneficial minerals deal from Ukraine, because Ukraine is suspectedly, it's not confirmed yet, suspectedly has high copper and cobalt reserves, as well as rare earth reserves, which would which would be extremely important for the US, because, as mentioned earlier, the main dominator in this market, especially in rare earths, is China. And the US obviously wants the opposite of that. So, a deal with the Congo would provide an alternative for the US, because in this whole talk with Ukraine, the US is constantly pushing for a minerals deal, but if they get one from the Congo, it sort of makes the U.S. less interested in the Russian-Ukrainian peace deal itself, and also less interested in Ukrainian benefits from this, because Ukraine's main leverage over the U.S. is their minerals. So if they lose that, um, the it might be very detrimental for Ukraine in terms of the benefits that they'll get from a possible peace talk.
Yeah, this is quite intriguing. And another thing that we talked about in Mr. Banks told me this, and I don't know if you know what a hegemon is, Rishan. Do you know what that is, a hegemonic power?
Is it when wait? I think I do, but could you explain it, please?
Like a hegemon is like, for example, like US, China. These are all hegemonic powers, like basically like powerful nations who have a lot of power and influence over
Oh
other.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and they have the freedom to roam around and like spread their influence on other nations and states as well. So, of course, China and US are huge hegemonic powers, and they have obviously have this rivalry as well. So, this brings me to my question that. Rishan, like, do you think that the U.S. is genuinely interested in building African capacity, or are they just interested in reducing dependence on China?
Um, I honestly I don't think the U.S. is interested in the good of the Congo and Africa, but I think the they're interested in reducing the ability of China, and they're interested in reducing their dependence on other powerful nations because currently the U.S.'s minerals are the rare earths and minerals mainly come from China, and if they possibly came from Ukraine, it would also Ukraine is still heavily EU backed, so the U.S. has less influence over what they can do in Ukraine if they got that minerals deal. But in the Congo, the U.S. has much more freedom, and they can throw their weight around more, and it also reduces their trading gap with other nations.
So, yeah, now maybe before moving on to the next segment, is there anything else you'd want to add? Maybe Super, do you have anything else you want to add or ask?
No, not really. I feel Rishan covered this introductory topic very well.
Yeah, I think like another interesting thing that we can look at is like Russia's perspective and all of this, because like while the U.S. is offering joint ventures and battery supply chains, I don't think that Russia is just sitting idle and not doing anything. Because since its invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Russia has doubled down on its push for alliances in the global South, and Africa is a big part of that plan. So Russia's strategy isn't all flashy with all the electrical vehicles and everything. It's security, weapons, and ideology. In 2023, Russian officials met with Congolese leaders to discuss military cooperation and resource development. And rumors swirled that about potential arms for mineral deals, similar to what Russia has done in Sudan, Mali, and the Central African Republic. And um, then there's Wagner. Before Prigozhin's death, Wagner forces were already present in parts of Africa, trading security services for access to gold and diamond mines. And there's no confirmed Wagner presence in the DRC yet, but the growing instability in eastern Congo and in the drawdown of UN peacekeepers, that creates a vacuum that Moscow could exploit. And I think that Russia's pitch is simple. Like, they're just saying that we don't lecture you about democracy, we don't colonize, we're here for mutual benefit. And for some African leaders, that's an appealing narrative, especially when the West is seen as slow moving or hypocritical. So while the US is playing the long game with clean energy and supply chain independence, Russia is offering short term power, security, and global validation.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said. I think Russia's intentions are not the same as the US and possibly even not the same as China's. But I think if the US can secure this minerals deal with the Congo, it could also like I mentioned earlier, the Trump is trying to draw Putin away from Xi Jinping. A good minerals deal with the Congo would also benefit the U.S. in terms of being able to help um, Russia get their rare earths and minerals without having China as a middleman, which would affect the Chinese economy because Russia and China are sort of like backing each other constantly in terms of their arms. Russia can provide China with their bustling arms sector, and China gives back to Russia with their semiconductors, their rare earth minerals, and it's a really beneficial situation for both nations. But if the U.S. can destabilize that, it would really benefit their political ambitions.
Yeah. So another question out of curiosity, like, do you think that Russia intends to have a symbiotic relationship with the DRC, where they also like have genuine intentions to provide for them and have a symbiotic relationship, or do you think this is just for exploitation?
Um, I think I think Russia honestly would not be too fussed about their relationship with the DRC. I think it would be more of a one-way road, as in they just get their minerals from the DRC. They get their rare earths, minerals, copper, cobalt, nickel, whatever they need, because Russia really does not need to worry about the DRC politically as a political entity because opposite to what the US and China want, the China wants their influence in Africa. US wants to get rid of Chinese influence in Africa, which could result in different partnerships occurring. For Russia, it's simply economic, and also um, what Russia can offer. I don't think that they would because the DRC, what Russia can offer is arms and their military sector, their military developments, but I don't believe that it would be worth it for Russia to build a strong relationship with the Congo, who realistically, even if the US manages to sort of stabilize the situation, although they have such vast resources, like Suprit said, the country's people are in deep poverty, and I don't believe that's going to change anytime soon. I think the rich are just going to get richer in the Congo, which will help foreign nations like the US, possibly China, depending on how it plays out. But I don't believe the Congolese people will benefit much from the situation. I
Yeah.
don't believe Congo will achieve new heights in their geopolitics. I think it'll just be a simple mineral and rare earth producing country, and I don't think it will end up amounting to much.
I see. I see. That's pretty interesting. Like, it's just interesting how like they're just stuck in a cycle. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. And yeah, I completely agree with you, Rishan. It was pretty like, you had a pretty insightful perspective, and yeah, I completely agree with you. And yeah, I think Super. Do you have your hand raised? What do you want to add on?
I completely agree with Rishan as well. However, I also feel that, as Rishan already mentioned, Russia's deepening its ties, kind of deepening its ties with African nations after facing Western sanctions because it wants to secure strategic resources. For instance, Russian backed companies and mercenary groups such as Wagner have been involved in securing mining deals, sometimes in exchange for military assistance. But Shazib, to answer your question, does Russia truly seek a symbiotic relationship with the DRC, or is it simply exploiting the country for its own geopolitical and economic gain? Well, many argue that Russia's strategy mirrors the extractive colonial approach because they are offering security and political support in exchange for mineral access without meaningful development for the Congolese people and the common man. And unlike a true partnership that fosters mutual economic growth, Russia's involvement in the DRC often prioritizes short term resource extraction over long term investment in infrastructure, education, or industrial development. And these historical parallels are striking because just as colonial powers once justified their presence with promises of stability and trade, Russia today presents itself as a strategic ally while engaging in deals that overwhelmingly benefit its own military and economic aids. However, I wanted to pose a very concerning question and aspect to all of this because there are concerns that the ongoing arms race in Eastern Europe is increasing the availability of illicit weapons in Africa, which is further fueling violence in the DRC. So, what can the DRC do to combat this and ensure that there is more peace and assist the peacekeepers in maintaining this peace as there's already reduced funding for long-term peace efforts in the DRC.
Yeah, I think that was very insightful, Supreet. I completely agree with you. Russia is stepping up their military ambitions abroad, but I think they're gonna obviously focus more at home right now because they are, I think, on Russia's military priorities. Obviously, Ukraine is number one. If they pin this ceasefire down, if they manage to get a beneficial ceasefire where they get what they want, Ukraine doesn't join NATO, um, Europe doesn't put troops in Ukraine. All this is very circumstantial, hypothetical. Even if all this happens, I think Russia's next step militarily on their foreign policies would, I would guess, be Azerbaijan, Armenia. That's conflict still going on. Um, they would want to resolve that. They were what was holding peace in that region before their invasion of Ukraine. Once that happened, they pulled troops out of Armenia and Azerbaijan. Obviously, they had to focus on their own military endeavors. I think foreign military use is still pretty far away for Russia, pretty far in the future. But yeah, I completely agree with you. They are still dabbling in it a bit, and they'll definitely do some more expansive military projects in the future.
Yeah. So, moving on, I think now we can like move on to the climax. Like, so what does all this have to do with peace in Ukraine? Well, when the guns eventually go silent, and they will, someone's gonna have to host the table. Like, someone's gonna have to meditate, validate, and legitimize the terms of any peace process. And I don't think that won't just be NATO or the UN. It's gonna be the global South: Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, the silent majority of the states that haven't taken sides. And that's where the Congo becomes critical. The DRC hasn't condemned Russia's invasion in harsh terms. It also hasn't openly backed Moscow. It's walked a carefully neutral line, voting abstentions at the UN while keeping diplomatic doors open to both Russia and the West. And like, why did this matter, you may ask? Because in global diplomacy, neutrality equals credibility. And when Russia claims that the West is isolated, and then the US says democracy must win, it's countries like the DRC that serve as the litmus test. And their stance tells us like who's winning the narrative, who's building real alliances, and who will shape the next phase of global order. And think about it: if Congo, the world's cobalt capital, the epicenter of new Cold War scramble, backs a Western-led peace framework that sends the message that the global South is with the U.S., but if it supports a Russia-China invasion of global security, or even just stay silent. That gives Moscow the ammo to say, look, Africa's with us. The West doesn't speak for the world. And even without a formal vote, Congo's strategic ambiguity will be interpreted as a statement. And this is soft power. I think this really shows what soft power is, because it's a subtle influence. And as we talk about tanks, missiles, and ceasefires, let's not forget the minerals, the meetings, the silence, and the swing votes. Peace doesn't just happen in negotiation tables, it happens in quiet capitals like Kinshasa, where history, minerals, and diplomacy collide. And yeah, what else would you guys like to add on, Rishan or Suprit?
Yeah, I agree with you. The peace talks in for Russia and Ukraine are, I mean, they're on a very tight rope right now. It's swaying either way. One day it looks like Russia's gonna get away with it really light, and then the other day it looks like Ukraine's gonna get a good deal. And then also you have all these, like you said, in the global south, you have all these neutral nations, who will eventually end up playing a part but haven't done much yet. Um, yeah, I think the situation is still on a very, it's still imbalanced, and it's hard to say where it's gonna go from here. And it's interesting to see how or what the DRC's role in all this will end up being, because you got many incentives from every nation involved. The main talkers in this are obviously the EU, the US, and obviously the nations involved, Russia and Ukraine. But then you have each other's incentives. Russia wants to keep the land that they took, and they don't want the Ukraine to join NATO, and they don't want uh, US or EU troops in Ukraine. And then you have Ukraine, who wants to get back at least until 2014, so excluding Crimea, their territory back, or maybe even all their territory pre 2014, where Russia annexed Crimea. They want all that territory back. They want EU troops. They want peacekeepers. They want NATO. They want to possibly join NATO. They And then you have the U.S., who are willing to comply to Russia's demands, but they also want a minerals deal from Ukraine. And the minerals deal itself is a whole different topic, because that's got its own layers. The U.S. believes Ukraine should compensate for the billions that the U.S. put into Ukrainian defense. Ukraine believes that it is in the US's best interests for them to invest in Ukrainian defense. And then obviously you saw how Zelensky and Trump clearly did not get along. The scene for Russia and Ukraine is constantly changing, and it's tough to see where it's going to go.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Rishan. And yeah, oh yeah, Suprit, I see your hand is raised. Do you want to add anything? Oh, Suprit left.
Oh,
What?
sorry, I think there might be some technical difficulties going on.
Oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, moving on, like Rishan, we just talked about like a very significant and crucial part of the episode and our conversation. We talked about like Congo's stance in this entire situation. So um what's next? Like what else do you think we should cover that's important, Rishan?
Um, I think talking about what the US might possibly end up doing in the future to the Congo is a topic worth mentioning, because we talked about a prospective minerals deal with the Congo for the US, but what would that actually look like is something we don't know yet. it's very early days for this mineral deal, and if it does end up going through, the US will need to work pretty hard to establish their peace. Um, foreign powers have attempted before to establish peace in the Congo because, as mentioned before, the Congo is extremely rich in their natural resources. But um, the US will need to establish a strong government which the people are confident in, and they'll need to uh, establish peace among Congo's neighbors and the people who are playing a massive part in this incredibly complex, layered civil war, or well, proxy war. You have supporting the DRC government, you have multiple powers, like you have Angola, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Chad, Sudan mainly, who are supporting the AFDL and the Democratic Republic of Congo's official government. You have And then you have Rwanda and Uganda, who, as mentioned before, did support the government until the government turned against them, which is when they started supporting their own militia groups. So the Congo backs the RCD, Uganda backs the MLC. Then you also have local Congolese armed groups like the Mai Mai militias. They're That's also getting into some really confusing territory because some of them are allied with the government and backed by the government. Then you also have some who are just like essentially warlords taking over their own land. And that's another reason to, as mentioned before, another reason why the Congolese people are suffering so much is because you have these small militia groups dotted across the country controlling mines, not allow and being extremely corrupt and not allowing anything to happen basically with the vast resources the Congo has. You also have the Hutu militias, which started this whole conflict. They're the remnants of the Rwanda's genocidal regime, and they're fighting Rwandan influence in the DRC. You also have Burundi, who also play a large role in all this. So you have all these varying nations wanting different things out of the war. Mainly Rwanda, Uganda, being the main aggressors, foreign aggressors. It's going to be extremely difficult for the U.S. to create peace in such a fragmented nation and region. And also, even if the U.S. hypothetically gets the peace down um, and gets a good minerals deal out of it, you also have to look at the possibilities for trade for the U.S. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, this whole thing is about the minerals deal and how it compares to a possible minerals deal with Ukraine. Because that's what the US really wants out of Ukraine. But then if you look at the Congo is a landlocked country, or essentially nearly landlocked. They have a very small coastline. So transport and trade out of the Congo is going to be an extremely difficult task. And you could use the Congolese River, but it's a um, it's a very large nation, and it'll be much easier for the U.S. to get a minerals deal out of Ukraine instead of the Congo.
Yeah, that was really insightful, Rishan. I think adding my own perspective to this, I think like looking ahead and seeing what the U.S. might do in this situation. I think like because in Washington the thinking is shifting. Like for decades, the U.S. viewed Congo through the lens of humanitarian crisis, conflict zones, and development aid. But now it's being recast not as a charity case, but as a strategic asset. Like I think what we can expect to see in the future is that we can expect to see more American-backed mining operations and public-private partnerships and support for local refining capacity. And the goal would be to reduce reliance on China, secure supply chains, and tie Congo's mineral wealth to American industrial and defense sectors. And the US may ramp up military training, counterinsurgency programs, and intelligence sharing, especially with a UN peacekeeping mission set to withdraw. And why, you may ask? And I think it's because instability in eastern Congo threatens mining operations, and Washington doesn't want to lose guard to Russia or private militaries. And another thing that we have to look out for is that I think we have to watch for high profile state visits, more invitations to summits like the US Africa Leader Summit, and even whispers of non NATO security frameworks in Africa. Biden or any future administration might offer Congo a more central role in climate diplomacy in exchange for strategic alignment. Um, um yeah. But here's the catch. Wait, I'm sorry, not Biden. I meant Trump. I'm sorry. But as I was saying, like, here's the catch. Congo's leaders are tired of being lectured, tired of extractive relationships. So the U.S. will have to walk a tightrope between promoting values like democracy, transparency, and human rights, while also not scaring of Kinshasa with demands or conditional deals. And if the U.S. doesn't move fast, Russia, China, and even BRICS nations will be waiting. And that's the new great game. And Congo is no longer a passive player. It's calling meetings, comparing offers, and keeping its cards with very close to the chest. So yeah, Suprit, what else would you like to add on?
Yes, Shazib, I completely agree with you. If the US wants a quick mineral deal with Congo, it's beneficial for their economy. However, the DRC must also be cautious because typically, trade deals and partnerships are frequently structured to favor Western buyers, locking Congo into an extractive model where raw materials leave the country while little wealth stays behind. So, how does Congo change the script? There are a few steps that they must take to ensure that these new contracts do not end up extracting and exploiting the country as they have always been exploited in the past as well. So, to start off, they must renegotiate contracts. The DRC must push for fairer contracts with US companies, and this means demanding transparency in agreements, such as by ensuring a higher percentage of profits staying within the country and preventing exploitative clauses that benefit American firms at the expense of Congolese workers and the environment. Number two, they must strengthen local ownership. Instead of allowing Western corporations or Chinese or Russian corporations to dominate mining operations, the government should support the growth of Congolese owned mining companies. And this would ensure that wealth generated from minerals actually benefits the local economy. Number three, increasing processing and manufacturing capacity. One major reason the DRC remains vulnerable is that it primarily exports raw minerals instead of processing them domestically. If the country develops refining and manufacturing capabilities, it can retain more economic value and negotiate from a stronger position and possibly become a tertiary economy as well. Number four, they must leverage global competition. The DRC should avoid over reliance on any single foreign power, and by engaging with multiple partners, whether China, the EU, Russia, US, or regional African alliances, it can play nations against each other to secure better trade terms. And finally, they must strengthen their environmental and labor policies because many companies take advantage of weak regulations in developing countries, and the DRC must ensure strict labor laws, environmental safeguards, and corporate accountability to prevent exploitative practices.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying, but I think something that should be said is, um, the possibility of all this is very minute, in my opinion. I obviously I don't know what's gonna happen, but the possibility of the DRC putting in good humanitarian um, systems and sustainable mineral mining business would be extremely beneficial. I think they need to do it, but I don't think that's gonna happen, because realistically, the people in power will just try and make as much money as they can, and that's gonna be through just giving it, selling out to foreign powers, and just letting them do whatever they want. But also, I think another thing that should be said is how the US is sort of changing its foreign investment because the previously the only country that would really invest in risky countries like in Africa and especially the DRC in stable countries would be China. China has been constantly investing in foreign countries. They build roads in the Congo. Most of the mining companies in the Congo are Chinese. The US prefers to go for stable economies, which they know they can make money out of. But now, I think they're getting a bit intimidated by China's influence and growing influence. And I think the US, we're going to see more of this, where the US invests into more unstable countries, riskier countries. And another thing I think that should be said, which is very interesting, is not too long ago, beginning of this year, beginning of Trump's term, he abolished the he's he signed an executive order which either abolished or froze the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And basically what that did is now that allows foreign investors, American investors, to bribe foreign officials, which I mean, before as a law is, I mean, it makes sense why the law was there, but now that Trump got rid of it, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays a part in the US's foreign investment compared to China.
Yeah, Rishan, I think like what you said was really insightful. And another fact that you were talking about was like, yeah, China, as we mentioned before, China is a hegemon and they have a huge influence over Africa. And the fact that US kind of does want to, like, they have a rivalry, and the US also wants to prevent that influence spreading more. The fact that you mentioned that, that was also something that I was thinking about, and that was really insightful, Rishan. But another factor that we haven't mentioned about is yeah, we've talked about the US strategy, we've talked about Russia's stance on this, but what is Congo planning for itself? Because for the first time in decades, the DRC has a real chance to move on from just being a pawn to being an actual player, a country that shapes policies, not just reacts to it. So I think that what they um what this they should strategize for themselves, and there are possible strategic moves by the DRC. Like, for example, the Congo could continue to walk a tightrope between the east and the west, accepting aid and investments from both the US and Russia without fully aligning with either. And think of it like hedging bets in a geopolitical poker game. This neutrality gives Congo flexibility, leverage, and diplomatic capital. And their own president may double down on positioning the DRC as a regional power, especially in Central and Eastern Africa. And this could mean expanding influence through the African Union, hosting peace talks or forums, and demanding a bigger role in BRICS or the future G20 style blocs. And Congo doesn't just want money, it wants respect and a seat at the table. And the third strategic move is that I feel like we could expect Kinshasa to renegotiate mining contracts, especially with foreign powers, because there's rising local pressure to reclaim sovereignty over the cobalt and copper sectors, ensuring fair wages, reduced child labor, and pushback against Chinese monopolies. And this is also where the U.S. offers might look more attractive if they come with promises of local industry and long-term development. So, like, the world sees Congo as the land of minerals, but Congo sees itself as a future voice of Africa, one that's learned from colonialism, war, and exploitation, and is now ready to make the rules. But I think here's the irony: by doing less, by staying neutral, staying quiet, the DRC may be doing the most. It's not making, like, they're not making the noise; they're making moves. So, yeah, like what else do you guys think, like Rishan or Supreet?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the Congo, it'll be interesting to see what they do in the future. Whoever takes power from this, it's looking like it's going to be the DRC government, but could be M23, could be Rwandan backed governments like it did in the first and second Congolese wars. Whoever takes power will greatly influence their foreign policy and how they react to foreign nations investing in in their country. So I think it's still very difficult to tell what the Congo will do in the future. But yeah, I agree with what you said.
Yeah. So, Supreet, do you have anything else that you want to add on?
No, not really. You guys have covered the topic very well.
All right, so I think we're near the end of our podcast. So, um, moving on to the conclusion, I think that, we started with the colonial scars, and like DRC was a nation brutalized by empire, pillaged for rubber, copper, and blood. And then we moved through the Cold War, just watched dictators rise and fall, saw the ashes of genocide ignite continental wars, and now we're here with the Democratic Republic of Congo quietly sitting at the crossroads of the world's most urgent issues: climate transition, resource control, peace, and power. Like the US wants minerals, Russia wants influence, and the world wants a solution to a Ukraine. And Congo wants a future, one that it can build on its own terms. And in a time of loud conflicts and even louder politics, Congo is playing a silent strategic game. And it doesn't need to shout to be heard. I mean, because in today's global power dynamics, the most valuable card is the one that everyone wants but that no one can hold. And I think that card just might be in Kinsaha's hand. Yeah. So, yeah, Rishan, I see your hand is raised. What do you want to add on?
No, my hand wasn't raised, but I think you covered everything. Um, yeah, I think we've covered all the topics we should have covered. I think you concluded well, and I think it'll be interesting to see what happens in the future with the Congo.
Yeah, and like Rishan, just a question out of curiosity, like, you're really experienced about this entire topic, and you provided us with a lot of insightful conversations. And personally, like Rishan, what was your key takeaway in our conversation that we had today?
I think the key takeaway would have been the possibility of U.S. investment not only in the Congo but in Africa and other nations as well, even if they are war torn, which and unstable, which is something the U.S. didn't do before. So I think that would be the key takeaway.
Yeah, Supreet, what about you? What key takeaways did you have?
One key takeaway that I have is that Congo must try its best to reduce the exploitative practices that companies use in the country. And one key takeaway is that yes, the Congo can uh, juggle between both the West and other countries like China and Russia. And as you already mentioned, neutrality is very good, and this will be beneficial for the country in the future as well.
Yeah, yeah. These are really insightful. I think, for me personally, like one key take was like the conversation that we were having of like how the hegemonic powers, they really want to have a significant influence um on the African nations, and specifically DRC, like how how these nations like the US or even Russia, they intend to have like they intend to have relationships which would only benefit themselves. And like Rishan had quoted before, Rishan had quoted that the rich just get richer and the poor get poorer. That's just like the reality that we live in, and the discussion that we had on that topic and segment was really insightful and interesting for me. Um so yeah, I think to just to give the final verdict, I'd say that, you know, in a world dominated by great power rivalries and headlines about tanks and treaties, the DRC, you know, as we mentioned, they stand as a quiet but a critical force. Like the DRC is rich with the mineral reserves, turbulent past, and strategic neutrality places it in a unique position, not just as a supplier of the world's most valuable resources, but as a potential broker of influence in global peace diplomacy. And as the US and Russia uh, vie for leverage in the post Ukraine world order, Congo holds as a subtle but powerful card the ability to shape alliances, signal shifts in global sentiment, and remind the world that silence is not absence, it's agency. So, is that a conclusion that you guys would agree with?
Yeah, yeah, I agree with the conclusion.
I
I
agree with you
think,
completely.
yeah, yeah, Supreet, you talk.
Sorry for disrupting you. Yeah, I agree with you completely as well, Shazib and Rishan. Do continue.
Yeah, Rishan, what were you saying? Super just
Sorry, I missed. No, I didn't have anything to say. It was just, yeah. So I think you said everything I wanted to say.
Oh, okay, got it, Rishan. So, yeah, guys, thank you for watching, and I really appreciate you for being here today, Rishan. A huge thank you to you. You provided us with some really insightful perspectives and information. Like, I think me and Supreet personally, as the host, I think we also gained a lot of information and we learned a lot. And obviously, we can see that you're really knowledgeable about this topic, and you're a really knowledgeable person about politics and history in general. So yeah, bro, and I have no doubt that you're gonna do good in IB history next year, bro. So like, yeah, just thank you for your insightful thoughts and information, bro. And personally, bro, I think I learned personally, Rishan, I think I learned a lot with this conversation. So I'll just like to thank you for being here, Rishan. Is there anything else that you'd want to add on before we end it for today, Rishan?
No, there's nothing I want to add on. Thank you very much for having me on. I enjoyed talking with you guys about it.
All right, thank you, Rishan. So that's the episode for today, and thank you everyone for watching. Bye.
You know, but